When the Ark crashed into the shallow oceans of Maya, the refugees inside were greeted by a hostile atmosphere of carbon monoxide. Luckily, they were somewhat prepared for this, and had already given the next generation the modifications they would need in order to survive in this new environment. Much like the Frill people before them, the refugees were given gill-like filters along their necks, and red skin that would protect against solar radiation. The first major difference made to the Frill people's original design came in how they cooled themselves off. While many simply used the same collars as the Frill people, some modified the already large ears of the Terramin into massive fans, or the fur of the Jupitorans into coats of specially designed hairs that were well adapted to reflecting heat. Others adapted the photosynthetic skin of the Martians to work here as well. But interestingly, since Maya's atmosphere refracted light differently, blue plants were better at absorbing sunlight than green, so that's the color their skin became. While the energy offered by this photosynthesis was not enough to live off of alone, some people worked toward making a system where they could sustain themselves entirely from the sun's energy. This resulted in some people being designed with massive collars and branch-like stalks growing from either side of their neck, topped with stretched-out skin that acted like leaves. These people were referred to as stemlings, and they mostly lived along the planet's equator where it was bright and sunny all year long. Another interesting example of unique adaptations to Maya can be found in the Cuddlemen. Of course, lacking a humanoid form to start with, the Frill people's original design would have been a hard fit for them. Instead, they were modified to have thick, leathery skin to avoid drying out in Maya's arid climate. They also repurposed the vents on either side of their head, which were once used for jet propulsion when they were still aquatic, into the filters they would need to breathe the planet's air. Finally, their fin fridges were changed into large, elaborate fans used to cool them off. There was, however, a group that refused to adapt at all. A small subset of radical Martians who had remained purebred throughout the Ark's entire journey believed that they had already reached the peak human form, and as such, any genetic changes to that form would be blasphemous. Instead, they used post-birth surgeries to give themselves mechanical vents in their throats that did the same thing as the biological filters used by the Frill people. They also created large climate-controlled domes filled with oxygen, where the Martians could take their vents out and still be able to breathe. After some time, the refugees began relocating to other colonized planets as well, where they had to further adapt to the challenges presented there, like stemlings adapted to the severe axial tilt of Orion, or Cuddlemen to the eternal darkness of Easter Major. The use of advanced Jupitoran technology made space travel significantly cheaper, even for long distances. This meant the citizens could afford to move to distant planets without being part of government-funded colonist programs, which ushered in an age of post-human diversity. This diversity was most extreme on New Europa, a planet colonized by the Jupitoran government that quickly became something of a galactic melting pot, where species of all the various post-humans would congregate. The planet itself was made up almost entirely of a massive ocean that covered 86% of the surface. As such, most of the planet's cities were either large floating crafts or subaquatic metropolises, often some mix of the two. And to conform to this, most adaptations for New Europa made the post-humans semi-aquatic. One of the more common body types was that of the wrist fin, which had webbed feet and retractable fins that would fold over their hands when necessary. This made them effective swimmers while still preserving their dexterity. Others, such as the humpbacks, devoted themselves entirely to the water, becoming the keelmen. Large, whale-like creatures with dexterous trunks. You can often find them floating calmly through the shallow regions of New Europa's tropic waters. Others became fully terrestrial, such as the avians, many of whom gave up their ability of powered flight. Instead, they adapted their wings into a second pair of arms and were eventually dubbed the tetrabrachii. Other avians kept their wings, but since New Europa's gravitational pull was much stronger than Melona's, they were forced to reduce their size in order to remain airborne, becoming the winglings. Another species that took up the lifestyle of recreational space travel were the seasonal nomads of Orion, who adapted their walking cities into sprawling space stations with a biological center. And unlike most other post-humans, they didn't settle on any planet, opting to instead modify themselves to live in zero gravity. They did this by giving themselves long, slender limbs used to reach out toward their surroundings, along with large fins adapted from their ears, used to swim through the air. This group quickly became known as the floaters. There were, however, more homogeneous societies that stood in stark contrast to the rest. The aforementioned group of radical Martians quickly grew tired of being confined to small glass bubbles on Maya's surface, and left for greater things. This led them to colonize a planet called Nurin, which was terraformed to the point of being essentially a second Earth, even more so than Mars, being almost exactly the same size with a similar atmospheric density and even a single moon, just like humanity's first home. Here the Nurins lived in peace and harmony for many years, where they looked out at the other post-humans as a disgrace to the human form. Eventually, however, this distant animosity would boil over into something much more impulsive and dangerous, something that would change or outright end the lives of billions, and something that would leave the entire galaxy in a state of abhorrent awe. But that is a story for a later time.